At our family gathering, everyone cut me off and pretended I didn't exist. It felt like they all conspired against me, and when I finally discovered the reason, they were all left speechless. I'm a 29-year-old guy who works as a marketing coordinator. About a year ago, I moved out of state for a new job opportunity, and honestly, I hadn't been back home since then. I'd kept in touch with my family here and there through the usual calls and texts, but nothing too intensive. I didn't expect much to change in just 14 months of being away. Boy, was I wrong about that. The reason I finally came back was for my cousin Blake's engagement party. The whole extended family was supposed to be there, and I figured it would be a nice chance to reconnect with everyone. I was looking forward to catching up and maybe seeing some familiar faces I hadn't talked to in a while. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to slip back into the family rhythm and see how everyone was doing. I landed 3 days before the party and stayed in a short-term rental since my childhood bedroom had already been converted into my mother's meditation space. From the moment I stepped into the party, something felt distinctly off. No one greeted me right away, which was incredibly weird for our family. Usually, someone would shout my name across the room or come over with a plate of appetizers and a big smile. Instead, I saw a few heads turn in my direction, a couple of people made brief eye contact, and then they turned away. At first, I assumed I was being paranoid or maybe just overthinking things. Social anxiety can make you read into situations that aren't really there, right? So I went to grab a drink and tried to blend in naturally. But as I moved through the room, it became increasingly clear that something was seriously wrong. Conversations would die down when I got close to groups of people. Relatives who had known me since I was a kid would avoid looking at me for too long, almost like they were uncomfortable. Even Blake, the guest of honor, didn't really acknowledge me properly. He was surrounded by friends and relatives, laughing and making the rounds like any good host should. But when I raised my hand in a small wave to get his attention, he just gave me a tight, almost dismissive nod and turned his back to continue his conversation. It felt like I was being deliberately ignored. Things got significantly worse when I spotted my sister Maya across the room. She used to be the one person I could always count on in our family. We were practically inseparable growing up, always having each other's backs. When she saw me, she froze for just a second, and then she walked away mid-conversation with someone else. She actually left the party maybe 25 minutes after I arrived. No hug, no hello, not even a polite smile. She was just gone, leaving me standing there completely confused. I tried not to let Maya's abrupt departure get to me. I told myself that people get busy, that maybe I was imagining things or reading too much into perfectly normal social interactions. But over the next few days, I kept trying to make plans with various family members, cousins, aunts, even a couple of old school friends who still lived in town. The responses I got were either frustratingly vague, like, "Let's see, I'll get back to you," or just straight up silence. It was like everyone had collectively decided to give me the runaround. One night, as I was walking to my car, I ran into my uncle in the driveway. He was standing there with another relative, and they didn't see me right away. I caught part of their conversation, and what I heard made my blood run cold. My uncle said, "Can't believe he came back after what happened." The other guy just shook his head in what seemed like agreement or disappointment. When they finally noticed me approaching, they both stopped talking immediately and pretended like they were just having a casual chat about the weather. Feeling increasingly desperate for answers, I tried asking my parents directly. I figured if anyone would give me a straight answer, it would be them. My dad barely looked up from his newspaper when I brought it up, just mumbled, "Let it go," in that dismissive way that meant the conversation was over. My mom, who usually couldn't resist telling me when I looked tired or needed a haircut, simply said, "This isn't the time," and left the room. That was it. No explanation, no context, nothing. The worst part was that even my oldest friend Carlos started acting weird around me. We had gone to school together and had kept in touch through work birthdays and random game nights online over the years. Our friendship had always been solid and reliable, but when I asked to meet up in person, he made excuses about being busy with work commitments. Then he started ghosting me completely, which was completely out of character for him. By this point, it felt like I had stepped into some alternate version of my life where I was the only one missing a critical piece of information. Everyone else seemed to be operating with knowledge that I simply didn't have. I started going through everything I could think of. Old text messages, social media conversations, emails, calendar entries from the previous year. I checked photos, reread entire message threads with my cousins, and even went through old voicemail backups. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary or gave me any clues about what might have happened. Finally, I decided to call Sophia, one of my cousins who used to be the go-to peacekeeper in our family. If anyone knew what was happening or could give me some insight into this bizarre situation, it would be her. She had always been the one to mediate family disputes and smooth over conflicts before they got out of hand. When she picked up the phone, I asked her directly if I had done something to upset everyone. The question hung in the air, and she went completely silent for what felt like several long seconds. Then she said just 4 words that made my stomach drop. "You really don't remember." And then she hung up. That was all she said. No explanation, no clarification, nothing else. Just those words and then the dial tone. That was the exact moment I started seriously second-guessing myself and questioning my own memory. Maybe something really bad had happened during my last visit, and I had somehow forgotten it. Like a blackout moment or some kind of memory lapse. The thing is, I've never had memory issues before in my life. I've never even drunk enough alcohol to forget anything significant, so this possibility seemed completely foreign to me. But what else could possibly explain the way everyone was acting toward me? About a week into my trip, I got a notification from Facebook, one of those memories features that shows you what you posted exactly 1 year ago. It was a group photo from Blake's engagement announcement party. The same party, same house, same group of people I was currently being avoided by. Everyone in the photo was dressed up nicely and smiling broadly. I was positioned right in the middle of the picture with my arms around 2 cousins, grinning like everything in the world was perfect and nothing could go wrong. But here's what struck me as incredibly strange. Not one single person had brought up that night since I had gotten back to town. Not once. No jokes, no casual references, no remember when stories or funny anecdotes from the evening. It was like that entire night had been systematically wiped from the family record, as if it had never happened at all. But I was clearly there in the photo. I could remember laughing, dancing, and eating way too many pieces of baklava. I remembered Blake's fiancé thanking everyone for coming and making a lovely speech. I remembered hugging my sister goodbye at the end of the night. Except now I was starting to think that maybe I didn't remember it as clearly as I thought I did. The photo that had popped up in my Facebook feed was from exactly 1 year ago. Same backyard, same string lights hanging overhead, same group of people all dressed up and smiling for the camera. I was positioned right in the middle of the shot with my arms around 2 cousins, looking completely at ease like nothing in the world was wrong. But the more I stared at that image, the stranger it felt to me. Not a single person had brought up that night since I had returned to town. It was like the entire evening had been cut from the family record and erased from collective memory. This struck me as incredibly odd, especially for our family, which usually loved to reminisce about gatherings and special occasions. I decided to send the photo to a few of the cousins who were actually in it, along with a simple message asking if they remembered anything weird or unusual happening that night. I kept the message casual and non-threatening, just genuinely curious about their recollections. But I got absolutely no replies. Not even from the ones who usually heart or like everything I send them, even if it's just a random meme or funny video. Feeling increasingly desperate for answers, I started going through my phone's photo gallery, scrolling all the way back to see if I had recorded anything from that night that could possibly jog my memory. I found several short video clips from the engagement party, and most of them were the usual stuff you'd expect. People dancing around, some blurry selfies that didn't turn out well, someone recording their plate of food for absolutely no reason. But one particular video caught my attention and made me pause. It was taken from waist level, like I had been holding my phone in my hand and accidentally hit the record button without realizing it. The camera angle shifted around a lot, showing people's feet moving around with music playing in the background. Then suddenly, the sound cut to much louder voices, and the clip ended abruptly. I saved the audio from that clip and opened it in a simple audio editing program that I had used before for work projects. I cleaned up the sound quality, boosted the background audio levels, and let it play again. This time, the voices came through much clearer than before. Someone distinctly said my name, then a second voice said, "He crossed the line," followed by someone else yelling, "You ruined this for everyone." I played that audio clip again and again, trying to identify the voices. The first voice was unmistakably my father's. The second one sounded like it could be Blake. As I listened to it repeatedly, that's when I started to remember something that had seemed insignificant at the time. At the original engagement party, Blake hadn't left his fiancée's side for very long throughout the entire evening. He had been following her around more than what seemed normal, even for someone who was deeply in love and newly engaged. Back then, I had just assumed he was being protective and attentive, especially since she didn't know everyone in our extended family that well and might have felt overwhelmed by all the new faces. Now I wasn't so sure that his behavior had been purely romantic. I decided to call Blake directly to see if I could get some answers. Surprisingly, he actually picked up the phone when I called. I asked him straightforwardly if we could talk about what had happened at the party from the previous year. There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. Then he hung up without saying a single word. No explanation, no callback, nothing. I waited a bit to see if he might reconsider and call me back. But when that didn't happen, I decided to message his ex-fiancée instead. I kept the message extremely polite and didn't mention anything specific about the incident or whatever had occurred. I was just hoping for some kind of neutral conversation that might provide some clarity. However, less than an hour after I sent that message, I saw the notification that she had blocked me completely. That night, I received a message from what appeared to be a throwaway account. There was no name attached to it, no profile picture, and no identifying information whatsoever. The message contained just one sentence: "You should have stayed away." The cryptic nature of this warning made me genuinely nervous, and I found myself turning off all the lights in my rental and checking all the door locks twice before trying to go to sleep. I didn't get much rest that night. The next morning, one of the cousins I had messaged earlier about the photo finally replied to me. The message was disappointingly short and unhelpful. "You made your choice, don't drag us back into it." I had absolutely no idea what that was supposed to mean. What choice was this person referring to? All I could remember about that night was eating way too much baklava and complaining to someone about how my work-from-home setup was inadequate and uncomfortable. That was literally it. At this point, I was convinced that I was missing something extremely serious and potentially damaging. I decided to schedule a session with a local therapist to see if she could help me work through whatever memory issues I might be experiencing. I told her everything I could think of, except that I didn't really have anything concrete to say beyond what people weren't saying to me and how they were acting. The therapist walked me through basic memory trigger exercises and discussed potential memory gaps that could be signs of trauma or repressed experiences. But nothing stood out as unusual or concerning. My memory seemed completely intact except for that one specific night. Everything that happened before and after that party was crystal clear and easily accessible. One thing I did remember with absolute clarity was that my ex-girlfriend had broken up with me just days after that engagement party. We hadn't had any major fights or relationship-ending arguments before that point. The breakup had seemed to come completely out of nowhere and felt very sudden and unexpected. At the time, I had assumed it was related to the challenges of maintaining a long-distance relationship after my move. Now I wasn't so sure that was the real reason. I decided to reach out and message her, not really expecting any kind of response given how everyone else had been treating me. But surprisingly, she agreed to meet with me in person. We arranged to sit at a small cafe near her office during her lunch break. Throughout our conversation, she kept looking over her shoulder nervously, like she was worried someone might walk in and overhear what we were discussing. I didn't ask anything particularly heavy or confrontational right away. Instead, I started with basic small talk: how she had been doing, how her work was going, general life updates. She didn't ask much about me or seem particularly interested in my current situation. Then I finally brought up the engagement party and asked if she remembered anything significant or unusual about that night. She didn't say anything for quite a while, just sat there stirring her coffee and avoiding eye contact. Then she looked straight at me with a very serious expression and said, "You told the truth that night, but you did it in front of the wrong people." That was all she was willing to say on the subject. No additional details, no hint at what the truth even was, no context whatsoever. I didn't want to press her for more information because I was afraid of getting blocked or cut off like I had been by so many other people. We finished our drinks and walked out of the cafe without saying much else to each other. She didn't give me a hug or wave goodbye like she used to. She just got into a rideshare vehicle and left without any further acknowledgement. Back in my car, I opened up my phone's photo gallery again and replayed that mysterious video clip I had found. The moment when the angry voices kicked in, I paused the recording and tried to analyze what I was hearing. Someone had definitely been yelling my name, and there had clearly been accusations flying around. Whatever had happened that night, it obviously hadn't stayed private or contained. Something had been said publicly, and it sounded like I had been the one who said it. When I asked my ex-girlfriend to explain what she had meant about me telling the truth in front of the wrong people, she didn't elaborate much at all. She just shook her head and reminded me that she had warned me before about something. That comment didn't make any sense to me at first, but then something clicked in my memory. About a week before the engagement party last year, I had borrowed Blake's phone to call a mutual friend because my battery had died. While I was holding his phone, the screen lit up with an incoming message notification. I glanced at it instinctively, not intentionally trying to snoop or invade his privacy. The name on the message wasn't his fiance's, and the content of the message was distinctly flirty and inappropriate for someone who was supposed to be in a committed relationship. At the time, I didn't say anything about what I had seen. I simply gave the phone back to Blake and brushed off the incident, telling myself it was probably nothing serious or that I had misunderstood the context. But now that I was thinking about it more carefully, that wasn't the only suspicious message I had noticed. Over the course of that week leading up to the party, I had seen a few other messages that seemed questionable. It became increasingly clear that Blake was having conversations with someone behind his fiance's back. At the engagement party, I remember pulling Blake aside at some point during the evening. Or at least I thought I remembered doing that. The memory felt frustratingly blurry and incomplete. I knew that I had said something to him about what I had observed, and I was fairly certain we had argued about it afterward. But I had assumed that our conversation had been private, and that we had moved on from the disagreement. However, now with all these gaps in my memory, and considering how everyone had been treating me since my return, I wasn't sure about anything anymore. I started to wonder if our conversation hadn't been as private as I had believed. I decided to open my laptop and go through my old emails, focusing not on my inbox but on my drafts folder. That's when I found something that made my heart sink. There was an unsent message addressed directly to Blake's fiancée. In that draft, I had written out everything I had witnessed. The name of the woman Blake had been texting, screenshots I had apparently taken of their conversations, specific times when these exchanges had occurred, and detailed descriptions of how Blake would delete chat histories whenever his fiancée left the room. The timestamp on that draft email showed 2:47 a.m., which was after the time when that video clip with all the yelling had been recorded. This meant that whatever had happened with the microphone and the shouting had already occurred before I had written this email. If I was drafting this message after that incident, then it was possible that I had already tried telling people about Blake's behavior in some other way. Something much louder and more public than a private conversation. I went back to that audio clip and paused it again at the part where I could hear movement toward the camera. The sound suggested that I was holding something in my hand, possibly a piece of paper. When I compared the timestamp of the video clip with the draft email I had found, they lined up far too closely to be a coincidence. There was a distinct possibility that I hadn't just planned to send that email to Blake's fiancée. I might have actually read it out loud in front of everyone, or handed it to someone, or passed it around the party for people to see. That realization changed everything about how I understood that night. I suddenly remembered that our family had a group chat called Family Core that was typically used for planning major events like birthdays, holidays, and family trips. I went to check if there were any messages from around that time that might shed light on what had happened. But when I looked for the chat, it was completely gone. Not just muted or archived, it had been entirely deleted from my phone. I reached out to one of my friends who used to be included in that group chat and asked if they remembered what had happened to it. They told me that I had been removed from the group the day after the engagement party, and that the chat had continued without me. This was yet another piece of evidence that something significant had occurred that night. Then, I heard something else that made the picture even clearer. Through someone who worked with one of Blake's relatives, I learned that Blake's wedding had never actually happened. The entire event had been quietly postponed at some point, and then it was simply never brought up again. No public explanation was given. No official announcement was made. The wedding invitations were never sent out, and Blake's fiancée had moved back in with her sister for a while before eventually stopping her attendance at family events altogether. No one in the family had bothered to explain why this had all fallen apart. I decided to call my father directly to ask if my revelation about Blake's infidelity was what had caused this entire family crisis. I wanted to know if me exposing something I wasn't supposed to know was the root of all this tension and avoidance. But this time, the call didn't even ring through to his phone. My number had been completely blocked. My work situation had already started to suffer during this whole ordeal. People were beginning to notice the significant drop in my focus and productivity. I was falling behind on important reports and missing crucial deadlines. I requested a mental health break from my supervisor, and thankfully they approved several weeks off. This allowed me to extend my stay in town so I could continue trying to get to the bottom of what had really happened. I decided that if I couldn't get answers through phone calls or text messages, I would have to get them in person. I drove over to my old friend Carlos's house, the same Carlos who had been avoiding me since I had returned to town. He had been ignoring every single call and message I had sent him, which was completely out of character for someone who had been such a reliable friend for so many years. I parked outside his house and waited for him to get home from work. When he finally arrived and saw me sitting there, He definitely didn't look happy to see me. I told him plainly that I wasn't going to leave until we had a proper conversation about what was going on. After we stood outside in uncomfortable silence for quite a while, he finally relented and let me into his house. Carlos didn't waste any time with small talk or pleasantries. He got straight to the point and told me exactly what had happened during that engagement party. According to him, I had stood up in the middle of the celebration, walked directly to the microphone that was set up for toasts and speeches, and called out Blake for cheating on his fiancée. I didn't just mention it quietly or hint around the subject. I went into specific details about the text messages I had seen, described the screenshots I had apparently taken, mentioned the exact times when these conversations had occurred. The worst part was that Blake's fiancée was standing right there in front of everyone when I made this announcement. So were her parents, so were mine, so were dozens of other family members and friends. No one had any warning that this was coming. No one had been prepared for this kind of public confrontation. After I finished my impromptu speech, the entire place went completely silent. Then the arguing started in earnest. People began yelling at each other from different sides of the room. Blake's fiancée tried to approach me and talk to me directly, but according to Carlos, I wouldn't stop talking or calm down long enough for a rational conversation. My father stepped in to try to control the situation, and so did several of my uncles. After that, the rest of the evening descended into complete chaos. Carlos made it clear that I hadn't lied about anything. Everything I had said was probably true and accurate. But the way I had chosen to handle the situation, the timing, the public setting, the audience of unsuspecting guests, that's what had made the whole thing explode into a family crisis. It wasn't just a private disagreement or a quiet family discussion anymore. I had essentially lit a fire in front of the entire room and forced everyone to watch it burn. That was the night I lost half of my family. Not because I had made something up or spread false rumors, but because I had made something true far too loud and public for anyone to ignore or sweep under the rug. After hearing from Carlos about what I had actually done at the engagement party, I realized I needed more than just verbal accounts and secondhand stories. I wanted something concrete that could show me what had really happened that night. Something that didn't rely entirely on memory or potentially biased recollections from family members. I decided to call the event venue first. The same backyard rental place where the engagement party had been held. The woman who answered the phone remembered the event right away, which was not a good sign. She said there had been some kind of serious incident that night that had caused quite a disturbance. However, she explained that she couldn't give out any security footage or recordings unless Blake or someone from his immediate family formally requested it. That avenue was clearly closed to me. Next, I tracked down the DJ who had worked the party. He ran a small event company and still had the booking for Blake's party listed in his business history. When I asked him if he remembered anything unusual about that particular night, he didn't even hesitate before responding. He said there had been a specific moment where everything had gone completely sideways, and he'd had to crank up the music volume significantly because someone had started yelling into the microphone about betrayal and infidelity. The DJ told me that at first he thought whatever was happening might be part of a planned toast or speech. But it quickly became clear that this was not part of the program when people started arguing loudly, and several guests began walking out of the party entirely. I asked him if he happened to have any kind of recording from that night that might help me understand what had occurred. He explained that he usually sets up a small camera near his booth to capture demo footage for his social media marketing. He didn't make any promises, but said he would check his external hard drive and get back to me if he found anything relevant. While I waited to hear back from the DJ, I received a message from one of my cousins who I hadn't spoken to since before the original party. We had completely lost touch over the past year. All she sent was a single photograph without any accompanying text. The image showed Blake's ex-fiancée standing in the parking lot outside the venue with red, puffy eyes, surrounded by two friends who appeared to be comforting her. Her shoes were off, like she had kicked them off in distress. The caption underneath simply said, "She left early and never came back inside." This photo provided a stark visual representation of the emotional damage that had been caused that night. It was clear that my public revelation had devastated her, and she had been so upset that she couldn't even stay at her own engagement party. 3 days later, the DJ emailed me a short video clip that he had found on his equipment. The footage was grainy and had no audio track, which was disappointing but still potentially useful. I watched it on loop, trying to extract every detail I could from the poor quality recording. The camera was positioned facing the small stage area where the microphone had been set up for toasts. At one point in the video, I came into the frame, walking slowly toward the microphone with an unsteady gait. My jacket was hanging open, and one sleeve was slipping off my shoulder. I looked disheveled and agitated. I stood in front of the crowd and started talking while pointing at someone who was positioned outside the camera's field of view. Even though I couldn't hear what was being said, I could see that nobody in the visible crowd was smiling or looking pleased. People were staring at me with expressions that ranged from shock to horror to anger. The body language of everyone in the frame made it clear that whatever I was saying was not being well received. I took a screenshot of the clearest frame from the video and forwarded it to Blake, along with a short message asking if this was what everyone had been hiding from me for the past year. The message showed as delivered initially, but then the status changed to undelivered, which meant Blake had blocked my number. I checked his social media profile and confirmed that I had been blocked there as well. I didn't try to contact him again after that. That evening, I heard something slide under the front door of my rental property. When I opened the door, I found an unmarked envelope with no return address or identifying information. Inside was a set of printed screenshots from what appeared to be group chat messages. The chat was named Family Core, which was the same family group chat I had discovered was deleted from my phone. The first message was time-stamped around the same time as the engagement party. One cousin had written, "Did he seriously just say all that on the mic?" Another family member had followed up with, "That was an ambush, what the hell is wrong with him?" A third person had chimed in with, "This is unforgivable, he ruined everything." The next page of screenshots was even worse than the first. One of Blake's brothers had sent a message to the group claiming that I had done all of this because I was jealous of Blake. He alleged that I had always harbored romantic feelings for Blake's fiancée, and that I had been watching from the sidelines while Blake got engaged to the woman I supposedly wanted for myself. According to this version of events, when I couldn't handle seeing them together anymore, I had ruined the party out of pure spite and jealousy. I had never even heard this particular rumor before, and it was completely fabricated. I stared at that message for a long time, trying to process how quickly and dramatically the narrative had been twisted to make me look like the villain in this situation. I flipped through the rest of the printed pages, reading message after message from family members discussing what should be done about me. Some cousins were saying they should cut me off from the family completely. Others were worried that the situation would escalate further if I decided to make another public scene at future family events. No one in the entire conversation defended me or suggested that maybe I had been trying to do the right thing. Now I could see exactly how fast the story had been rewritten and redistributed among the family. It wasn't about Blake's infidelity anymore. It wasn't about his betrayal of his fiancée or the lies he had been telling. Instead, the narrative had been completely flipped to make it about me supposedly trying to blow up the party for personal, selfish reasons. That version of the story had stuck with everyone, and apparently no one wanted to dig any deeper into what had actually motivated my actions. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing myself in that silent video clip, walking up to the microphone with determination, waving my hand around, speaking passionately into it like I was giving some kind of important speech. Meanwhile, everyone around me was freezing in place, watching in shock. What struck me most about reviewing that footage was that I didn't see anger in the crowd's faces. I saw pure shock and disbelief, like I had flipped a switch that no one even knew existed. There was still one person I hadn't spoken to yet, and she was probably the only one who might actually tell me the complete truth from start to finish. My sister Maya had been at the party when everything went down, but she had left immediately after I arrived at this recent gathering. She hadn't said a single word to me since I'd been back in town. Not even a brief text message or emoji response. Maya used to be the person I told everything to when we were growing up. She had always been my closest confidant and strongest supporter. But now I had absolutely no idea what she believed about what had happened, what version of the story she had heard, or whether she was part of the group that had decided to cut me off entirely. I looked up her class schedule online and figured out when she would be back in town from college. I didn't want to send her a message that might go unread or get me blocked like so many of my other attempts at communication. I wanted to speak with her face to face, without any digital barriers that would make it easy for her to avoid the conversation. If I had truly set this fire that destroyed so much of our family dynamic, I needed to hear about it from someone who had actually witnessed the whole thing burn down around us. I waited outside my sister's college dorm for over an hour, having checked her class schedule beforehand and parked nearby so I wouldn't miss her when she returned. When she finally walked up the path with her bag slung across one shoulder, she stopped short as soon as she spotted me waiting there. I could see the recognition and immediate discomfort in her expression. I didn't try to chase her down or force a confrontation. I simply told her calmly that I wouldn't leave until we had a chance to talk about what had happened. After a moment of hesitation, she agreed to go to a coffee shop nearby where we could have some privacy. The atmosphere inside the cafe was quiet, but Maya kept glancing toward the windows like she was worried about being seen with me. We sat down at a small table, and I didn't start the conversation with anything dramatic or accusatory. I just asked her directly if she knew what had really happened that night at the engagement party. She didn't try to dodge the question or pretend she didn't know what I was talking about. Maya told me that the problem wasn't necessarily what I had said at the party. It was how I had chosen to say it, and how many people were watching when I decided to make my revelation public. She explained that our parents had personally vouched for Blake's character to his fiancé's family. They had promised her parents that Blake was loyal, responsible, and ready to settle down into a committed marriage. When I got on stage and called out Blake's infidelity in front of everyone, it didn't just make Blake look bad. It made our parents look like they were either liars or completely oblivious to their nephew's behavior. It undermined their credibility and made them appear foolish in front of people they barely knew. Then, Maya told me about the rumors and stories that had circulated after the incident. According to the version that had spread throughout the family, I had shown up to the party drunk and belligerent. People claimed that I had been pacing around and acting strangely earlier in the evening, making everyone uncomfortable. The story also suggested that I wasn't supposed to be involved in the wedding planning process, and that I had become bitter and resentful about being left out of important family decisions. According to this narrative, I had lashed out during the party because I couldn't stand being sidelined or overlooked. This was completely news to me. I didn't even know there had been any kind of wedding planning committee or special group making decisions about the event. I had never felt excluded from anything because I wasn't even aware that there was anything to be excluded from. Maya admitted that most of the family members hadn't bothered to ask questions or investigate what had really happened after the incident occurred. They didn't want to know the full story or understand the complex dynamics that had led to that moment. Instead, they had deliberately picked the cleaner, simpler version of events. The narrative of a jealous cousin who ruined an engagement party and caused a scene was much easier to digest than dealing with the uncomfortable reality of cheating, betrayal, and a public confrontation that exposed serious relationship problems. She then showed me something on her phone that made my stomach drop. It was a chat group called Emergency Circle that included over a dozen of our cousins. I had never known this group existed, and obviously I wasn't included in it. The messages had started the very night of the engagement party, right after everything had gone down. One person had written that they needed to do immediate damage control to prevent the situation from getting worse. Another family member had suggested cutting ties with me completely unless I was willing to apologize publicly for my actions. Someone else had asked whether I was mentally stable enough to be safely confronted about what I had done. The conversation had quickly devolved from there. The messages included memes making fun of the situation, screenshots of other conversations about me, and even a poll titled, "Do we invite Tyler to Diwali or NA?" One message claimed that I had main character syndrome and was always trying to make everything about myself. Another suggested that he probably did it to get close to Blake's fiancée. Several people had responded with laughing emojis to a joke about me shooting my shot during someone else's engagement party. Not a single person in the entire conversation had pushed back against these characterizations or tried to defend me. I asked Maya directly if she had ever tried to defend me or correct the false narratives that were being spread. She didn't answer right away, looking uncomfortable with the question. Then she said that she had tried to speak up for me for a little while after the incident. But nobody in the family had wanted to listen to alternative explanations. They didn't want to talk about what Blake had actually done wrong. They just wanted the entire situation buried and forgotten, and my public revelation had made that impossible. I asked if she could send me screenshots of those emergency circle messages so I could see the full scope of what had been said about me. She looked away from me and said that she didn't want to get any more involved in the situation than she already was. She didn't explicitly say no, but she didn't agree to help me either. Then, Maya stood up from the table and said something that has stuck with me ever since. She told me that I had been telling the truth that night, but I had essentially set that truth on fire when I chose to reveal it the way I did. With that, she walked away, leaving me sitting alone in the cafe. I stayed behind in the cafe and finished my coffee, processing everything Maya had told me. While I was walking back to my car, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from a cousin I hadn't heard from in over a year. Someone I had completely lost touch with during all of this chaos. The message was short and cutting. "You're still trying to be the hero in your own mess." I didn't bother replying to that accusation. Instead, I drove back to my rental and decided to take a different approach to understanding what had happened. I made a comprehensive list, a long, detailed one that included every date I could remember something significant occurring. Every message I still had access to, every phone call that had gone unanswered, and every interaction that had felt strange or hostile. I opened my laptop and started methodically matching all of these incidents to concrete evidence like photos, calendar events, receipts, and anything else that had a verifiable timestamp. I wasn't trying to prove my innocence to the people who had already decided I was the villain in this story. At this point, I just didn't want the narrative to keep slipping further and further away from what had actually happened. 1 year ago, I had tried to warn someone about a serious betrayal that was occurring right under her nose. In doing that, I had set off a chain reaction of family drama and conflict that no one wanted to properly address or understand. The family had decided it was easier to erase me from the equation than to deal with the uncomfortable truth I had exposed. So I started methodically pulling all the pieces back together before someone else could twist the remaining facts even further beyond recognition. I spent the next several days building a complete timeline of everything that had occurred, from the weeks leading up to the engagement party all the way through to the aftermath that was still continuing. I printed screenshots of conversations, labeled text message threads by date and participant, and matched photos to their timestamps. I even pulled up old calendar invitations and receipts, anything that had a date attached to it that could help establish the chronology of events. I wanted everything organized in one place, creating a comprehensive record that showed how the situation had started and how it had spiraled out of control. I remembered that there had been a professional photographer at the original engagement party. Not just a friend with a camera phone, but someone who had been hired specifically to document the event. I tracked down the photographer's contact information through the venue's old booking records and reached out to him. At first, he said he didn't remember much about that particular event, claiming it was just another job among many. But when I asked specifically about any photos that might show the crowd reaction or the stage area during the speeches and toasts, he hesitated and agreed to check his archived files. The photographer emailed me the next day with 2 photos attached to his message. The first photo showed me standing at the microphone with one hand gripping it and the other hand pointing straight ahead into the crowd. My mouth was open mid-sentence, and I looked completely locked in and focused on whatever I was saying. There was an intensity in my posture that was almost unsettling to see from the outside. The second photo captured several relatives in the crowd during my speech. My uncle had his hand pressed against his forehead in what appeared to be disbelief or embarrassment. My aunt looked like she was about to stand up from her chair, possibly to intervene or leave the area entirely. In the corner of the frame, I could see my father pushing past chairs and other guests, clearly walking toward the stage where I was speaking. That detail caught me completely off guard. I had no memory whatsoever of my father being anywhere near the microphone during my outburst. This suggested that the situation had escalated far beyond what I had previously understood or remembered. I sent both photos to my sister Maya and asked if she could remember what I had said to provoke such a strong reaction from our family members. Her reply came back as a single devastating sentence. "You called Dad a coward, said he always protects the wrong people." I stared at that message for a long time, trying to process what she had told me. I didn't remember saying those words, but they didn't sound made up or exaggerated. It meant that I hadn't just gone after Blake that night for his infidelity. I had also attacked our father publicly, calling him out for what I apparently perceived as his pattern of protecting people who didn't deserve it. I brought this revelation up during my next therapy session later that week. My therapist didn't seem particularly surprised by what I had discovered. She explained that explosive moments like the one I had experienced don't typically happen in isolation because of one person's single mistake. Instead, they usually come from pressure and frustration that has been building up for years, finally reaching a breaking point where everything comes pouring out at once. That night, I decided to write a letter. It wasn't addressed to Blake or to my mother, but specifically to my father. The letter wasn't an apology. I didn't take back anything I had said or done, but I did acknowledge that my public outburst had blown everything wide open in a way that had hurt a lot of people. I also admitted that maybe I could have handled the situation differently, though I wasn't sure what that alternative approach might have looked like. I folded the letter carefully, drove to my parents' house, and left it in their mailbox without ringing the doorbell or trying to have a face-to-face conversation. I didn't want to force another confrontation or put anyone in an uncomfortable position. A full week went by without any response from my father. I didn't hear anything from him directly, and I wasn't sure if he had even read the letter I had left in the mailbox. But then my aunt called me unexpectedly. She told me that she had seen the letter when she was visiting my parents. Apparently, my father had left it out on the dining room table, and she had read it while she was there. She wanted me to know that she thought the letter was braver than anything anyone else in the family had done throughout this entire ordeal. Her words meant more to me than I had expected them to. We arranged to meet for lunch the next day so we could talk more privately. During our conversation, she was careful with her words but very clear about what she wanted to tell me. She revealed that a lot of people in the family had quietly suspected that Blake wasn't being faithful to his fiancée for quite some time before the engagement party. There had been various signs, suspicious text messages, and strange stories that didn't quite add up when you looked at them closely. But no one had wanted to confront Blake directly about their suspicions. No one had wanted to be the person who said something and risked becoming the problem themselves. Everyone was content to look the other way and hope that either their suspicions were wrong or that Blake would change his behavior on his own. When I called out his infidelity publicly at the party, it forced everyone in the family to pick a side and take a position. Most people chose silence and denial because it was the easier path. They decided it was safer to blame me for causing drama than to acknowledge that Blake had been betraying someone who trusted him. I asked my aunt if anyone had ever confronted Blake directly about the cheating allegations after my public revelation. She told me that Blake had never actually denied anything I had said. He just claimed that his personal business didn't need to be aired out in front of wedding guests and family members. He never said I was lying about the text messages or the other evidence I had mentioned. According to my aunt, Blake and his parents had worked together to spread the alternative narrative throughout the family. They had told everyone that I was bitter and jealous, that I had romantic feelings for Blake's fiancée, and that I had used the engagement party to try to ruin their relationship because I couldn't handle seeing them together. This story had gained traction because it was much easier for people to understand and accept. It made me look like the victim of unrequited love rather than someone who had exposed actual wrongdoing. I asked my aunt whether I should try to reach out to more family members to clear things up. I wondered if I should send them the evidence I had gathered and show them the timeline I had constructed. She told me to think very carefully about that decision, warning me that some people would never change their minds regardless of what proof I could provide them. For many family members, the version they already believed felt safer and less complicated than the truth. That evening when I got home late, I noticed something by the front door as I was about to unlock it. There was another plain white envelope with no name or identifying information on it. Inside was a single typed line on printer paper that read, "You weren't wrong, but you've made enemies." There was no signature and no clue about where it might have come from. At that point, I stopped thinking exclusively about clearing my name or getting my family to understand my perspective. This wasn't just about being forgiven or fixing damaged relationships anymore. It was about figuring out how far I was willing to go when telling the truth had already cost me so much. I gave the envelope to a private investigator the next morning. I wasn't sure if the message was intended as a threat or if someone was just trying to warn me about potential consequences. But I wasn't going to take any chances with my safety. The investigator installed a small security camera above my door that was almost invisible from street level. He also started checking nearby surveillance footage from traffic cameras and local businesses to try to narrow down where the envelope might have come from. I went back to the DJ one last time to ask if anyone had returned to the venue the morning after the engagement party. He thought for a moment and said there had been someone there early the next day, just standing around the edge of the property for quite a while. They hadn't come inside the venue or approached anyone, but they had lingered near the perimeter. He thought maybe it was someone looking for a lost phone or wallet, but he couldn't provide any detailed description of the person. He remembered a hoodie and dark jeans, but nothing that really stood out. Around the same time, HR from my work checked in with me. They asked how I was holding up during my extended leave and reminded me that my mental health break had a time limit. I told them that I wanted to transfer to a different branch, somewhere quiet and far away from anyone who might know this story or be inclined to spread it further. They said they would start the necessary paperwork for an internal transfer. One day, while I was at the office clearing out my desk and personal belongings, a coworker stopped by to chat. She mentioned in passing that she knew someone who used to work with Blake's ex-fiancée. According to the rumors that were still circulating, Blake's former fiancé had moved across the country after everything went down. She hadn't told anyone where she was going, had cut ties with her parents and most of her extended family, and had said she needed space to rebuild her life. The coworker said that even with Blake's ex-fiancée completely gone from the picture, there were still rumors flying around that tied my name to everything that had happened, ranging from jealousy to obsession. I decided to meet with a defamation attorney to explore my legal options. She explained that the case would be challenging because the burden of proof would fall entirely on me. I would need to demonstrate that the rumors being spread about me were knowingly false and that they were being circulated with the specific intent to damage my reputation. She didn't say it was impossible, but she made it clear that it would require significant time, money, and witnesses who were willing to step forward and testify on my behalf. My aunt was still the only person from the extended family who was regularly speaking to me and treating me like a human being. When I told her about my conversation with the defamation attorney, she offered to support me if it came to pursuing legal action. She said it would probably cost her standing within the family and damage her relationships with other relatives, but if they decided to turn on her for supporting me, then so be it. She was done watching people get punished for telling the truth. The private investigator I had hired called me back 4 days later with some interesting findings. He had managed to track down the surveillance footage from the night the anonymous envelope was left at my door. At 4:32 a.m., someone wearing a black hoodie and surgical mask had pulled up in a small silver hatchback. They had walked up to my door, slipped the envelope through the mail slot, and left immediately without lingering or looking around. The license plate on the car matched a vehicle that was registered to Blake's younger brother. This was a significant development that I hadn't expected. I waited until evening and then drove to Blake's parents' house. I parked across the street and waited until I saw the younger brother step outside. I walked up to him directly and asked him about the envelope he had left at my door. To my surprise, he didn't deny anything or try to pretend he didn't know what I was talking about. He told me simply that he thought I deserved to know that someone still believed my version of events. He said he couldn't say it out loud because everyone else in the family was watching and judging, but he had never bought into the story that Blake and his parents had been spreading about my motivations. Blake's brother then explained the official narrative that had been circulating within the family. According to Blake's version, I had been quietly obsessed with his fiancée for a long time. Blake claimed that I had watched from the sidelines with growing resentment while he got engaged to the woman I supposedly wanted for myself. When I couldn't handle seeing them together anymore, I had ruined the engagement party out of spite and jealousy. According to this story, my public revelation had nothing whatsoever to do with Blake's actual infidelity. It was just the desperate act of a jealous cousin who couldn't accept rejection. Blake's brother said that most of the older relatives in the family preferred this version of events because it made more sense to them emotionally. It was easier for them to see Blake as an innocent victim and me as someone who had broken trust, rather than admitting that Blake had messed up badly and that I had simply exposed his mistakes in front of guests. They didn't want to think of Blake as someone who had betrayed his fiancée's trust. They wanted a clear villain in the story, and apparently I fit that role much better than Blake did. After my conversation with Blake's younger brother, I went home and opened my laptop with a new sense of determination. I compiled absolutely everything I had gathered: the photos from the professional photographer, screenshots of text conversations, the grainy video clip from the DJ, the printed group chat messages that had been anonymously delivered to my door, and the message from the cousin who had admitted they had deliberately cut me off from family events. I spent several hours typing up a detailed but concise explanation of what had actually happened. I included only verifiable facts, specific dates, and direct quotes from the evidence I had collected. I made sure not to embellish anything or add emotional commentary that might undermine the credibility of the information. Then I sent this comprehensive timeline by both email and text message to every single family member whose contact information I still had access to. The message I included was deliberately short and non-confrontational. "This is what happened. You don't have to respond, but now you know." Several of the messages bounced back immediately, indicating that some family members had blocked my email address or phone number. Others went through successfully but showed no reply or acknowledgement. However, I did get a few responses that gave me some hope. One cousin replied with, "I didn't know," suggesting that they had never heard the full story before. Another sent back, "I'm sorry you had to go through that," which felt like genuine empathy. One person just replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji, which I interpreted as quiet support. That night, my sister Maya called me. She didn't raise her voice or sound angry, but her tone was serious and concerned. She told me that Blake had already gotten to our parents before they had a chance to read my timeline. According to Maya, Blake had contacted them immediately to say that I was trying to destroy the family again, this time purely for attention and sympathy. I didn't argue with her or try to defend my actions. I just listened to what she had to say and then I hung up the phone. I realized that there was really only one thing left for me to decide: what I wanted to do next. Because despite everything that had happened, I wasn't finished with this situation yet. The next morning, someone knocked loudly on my front door. When I opened it, I found my mother standing on the front step. She didn't ask to come inside or suggest that we sit down somewhere to talk. She just stood there and told me directly that I had brought shame back into their lives just when things had finally started to quiet down. She said that the family drama had finally begun to settle and fade from people's memories until I sent that timeline to everyone, stirring everything up again. I told her honestly that the shame had always been there in the situation. It just looked better when nobody was willing to talk about it openly. I explained that I wasn't the person who had created the original mess. I had just stopped pretending that the mess wasn't there. My mother didn't respond to my explanation or engage with anything I had said. She simply turned around, walked back to her car, and drove away without another word. There was no hug, no goodbye, no acknowledgement that we were family. I knew in that moment that this particular door wasn't going to open again, at least not anytime soon. Later that afternoon, I received a call from a phone number I didn't recognize. When I picked up, a woman introduced herself as Blake's ex-fiance's older sister. She explained that someone had forwarded her the comprehensive timeline I had emailed to the family, and she had read the entire document twice from beginning to end. What she told me next was something I hadn't expected to hear. She said that her sister had actually already decided to end the engagement with Blake before the party had even taken place. Her sister just hadn't figured out how to break things off without starting a major family war or creating unnecessary drama. When I got on the microphone and forced everything out into the open, it didn't just expose Blake's infidelity, it also freed her sister from having to make the difficult decision herself. The public revelation had ended the relationship faster than her sister had planned. And yes, it had been messy and painful for everyone involved. But it had also liberated her from a situation where she felt trapped and uncertain about how to proceed. The sister used the word freed specifically, which stuck with me. She also told me that Blake had tried reaching out to her sister multiple times in the months following the broken engagement. He had sent messages, made phone calls, and even tried to contact her through mutual friends. But her sister had never responded to any of these attempts at communication. She had changed her phone number, moved to a different city, and deliberately hadn't told anyone in either family where she had relocated. She wanted a completely clean break from the entire situation. After that call ended, I went through my timeline one more time and added a few footnotes with additional dates and links to corroborate the information I had included. Then I sent a text message to the cousin who had created the Emergency Circle chat group, the same cousin who had led the effort to vote me out of family events and had participated in spreading false rumors about my motivations. I asked her if we could meet in person to discuss what had happened. To my surprise, she agreed to meet me at a public park the next day. We sat on opposite ends of a bench, maintaining physical distance that reflected the emotional distance between us. I asked her directly why she had organized the campaign against me and why she had led the effort to push me out of the family. She didn't try to deny anything or make excuses for her behavior. She told me bluntly that I was unpredictable and that no one knew what I might say next or who I might decide to go after. She called her actions self-preservation and seemed to feel justified in what she had done. I didn't argue with her explanation or try to change her mind. Instead, I blocked her phone number before I even left the park. I had no intention of speaking to her ever again. That evening, my aunt sent me a text message saying that my grandmother had been asking questions about the situation. Apparently, word had spread throughout the extended family that I had sent the comprehensive timeline to everyone, and now people were starting to wonder what had really happened at that engagement party. My aunt told me that my grandmother wanted to see me the next day, and that I should come alone. I went to visit her after lunch the following day. My grandmother was sitting in her sunroom, wrapped in her favorite shawl, looking as sharp and alert as ever. She didn't interrupt me once while I told her the entire story from beginning to end. I showed her all the printed messages, the photo of me speaking into the microphone, the anonymous envelope I had received, and the detailed timeline I had constructed. I didn't leave anything out or try to make myself look better than I was. When I finished explaining everything, she looked at me for a long time without saying anything. Then she asked just one simple question. "Did you tell the truth?" When I confirmed that yes, I had told the truth, she nodded slowly, squeezed my hand gently, and said, "Then you did what the rest of us were too afraid to do." Those words from my grandmother meant more to me than I can adequately express. She was the family matriarch, the person everyone respected and listened to, and she had just validated my actions completely. 2 days later, I started getting messages from cousins who hadn't spoken to me in months. These weren't apologies or admissions that they had been wrong about me. No one explicitly said that I had been right about Blake or that they regretted how they had treated me. But they were reaching out, which was something. Some of the messages asked if I was still in town and wanted to meet up. Others wanted to know what had really happened, suggesting that they were finally ready to hear my side of the story. One cousin who used to completely ignore me at family events suddenly sent a message that just said, "Wanna talk?" It was brief, but it represented a significant shift in how I was being treated. This wasn't a dramatic family reunion or a complete vindication of my actions. It wasn't a miraculous fix for all the damaged relationships, but it was definitely something. There were small cracks appearing in the wall of silence and hostility that had surrounded me for over a year. I didn't celebrate these small overtures or post about them on social media. I just kept building and maintaining the record of what had actually happened. Every message I received, every conversation that took place, every voice that had gone quiet and was now slowly making noise again, I documented all of it. This wasn't a breakthrough moment or a triumphant vindication. It was just a small break in a wall that had been too perfect and too controlled for too long. And I wasn't planning to step back from continuing to push against that wall now that it was starting to show some weakness. My father called me early one morning, and his number showed up on my phone screen for the first time in many months. When I answered, he didn't raise his voice or demand to know why I had sent the timeline to everyone in the family. Instead, he spoke quietly and said, "I still think you made a mess of it, but maybe the mess wasn't all yours to begin with." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop that afternoon. There were no dramatic hugs or extended periods of uncomfortable silence when we saw each other. We were just two people sitting across from each other at a small table with coffee mugs between us, trying to figure out how to have a conversation. My father told me that he had known Blake wasn't as clean-cut and trustworthy as everyone believed him to be. He admitted that he had hoped marriage would somehow straighten Blake out, and that if Blake settled down with a good woman, everything else would naturally fall into place. "I gambled on silence," he told me with obvious regret. I lost that gamble. I told him that the worst part of this entire experience hadn't been the exile from family events, or even the whispered rumors about my character. The most painful aspect had been watching my words and actions get completely rewritten and transformed into something selfish and spiteful. It was devastating to see people twist everything I had said into a story that made them feel more comfortable, even when that story bore no resemblance to what had actually motivated me. That night, several more cousins sent me brief messages. One asked if I had additional proof or evidence beyond what I had already shared. Another cousin forwarded my timeline to two aunts who apparently hadn't received it the first time. A cousin I hadn't heard from since the original engagement party reached out with questions about specific details. Still, no one directly apologized for how they had treated me over the past year. No one explicitly admitted that they had been wrong to ostracize me or that they regretted participating in the campaign to cut me off from family activities. But the fact that they weren't ignoring me anymore felt like significant progress. For now, that was enough. The day after these conversations started happening, something interesting occurred with the Emergency Circle group chat, the one where family members had joked about me, spread false rumors, and voted to exclude me from family events. The entire chat went dark and was eventually deleted. Someone had leaked screenshots from that private group to members of the larger family. The messages that had mocked me and spread lies about my motivations were suddenly being passed around and scrutinized by people who hadn't been part of the original conspiracy. The group chat was deleted within a few hours of the screenshots starting to circulate. No one publicly said who had leaked the information or taken responsibility for exposing what had been said in that private forum. The screenshots just appeared, people saw them, and then the evidence of what had been done disappeared when the chat was deleted. That same evening, another letter arrived in my mailbox. This one was handwritten, folded once, and came without an envelope. The handwriting looked familiar to me, and when I unfolded it, I saw that it was from Blake himself. The message was only 3 lines long. "You didn't have to ruin it for everyone." There was no apology, no expression of regret for his own actions, and no acknowledgement of the infidelity that had started this entire mess. It was just a note that placed all the blame squarely on my shoulders for exposing what he had been doing. I read the letter once, and then I walked into my kitchen and dropped it into the sink. I struck a match, set fire to the corner of the paper, and watched it burn completely to ash under the running water. I felt no need to keep it or respond to it. A few weeks later, Blake's ex-fiancée reached out to me, though not directly at first. Her sister sent me a message asking if I would be open to having a phone conversation. I said yes, and when we spoke, Blake's former fiancée thanked me in a way I hadn't expected. She didn't just thank me for what I had said that night at the engagement party. She thanked me for the fact that it had happened at all. She explained that she had known something was wrong in her relationship for a long time, but she hadn't had the strength or courage to call it out herself. My public outburst had given her an escape route from a situation she didn't know how to leave on her own. She told me that she had been in therapy since the engagement ended and that she was doing much better now. For the first time in years, she said, she was finally breathing freely and felt like herself again. The dramatic way the truth had come out was painful and embarrassing, but it had ultimately saved her from making a terrible mistake. My workplace approved my transfer request not long after this conversation. I packed up all my belongings and moved to a different city, one where I wouldn't randomly run into anyone from my childhood, from the extended family, or from the wedding that never ended up happening. It was a place where no one would ask me what had really happened or try to smooth things over with awkward small talk. The new location offered something I desperately needed: complete quiet and anonymity. In my free time, I started volunteering at a support group for people who had been estranged from their families over moral disagreements and ethical stands. Some of the members had been cut off for taking unpopular positions on important issues. Others had been ostracized for refusing to play along with family dynamics that they found unacceptable. The group wasn't focused on self-pity or dwelling on past grievances. Instead, it was about connecting with people who understood what it meant to walk away from toxic situations with your integrity intact. We didn't have to explain every detail of our stories or relive traumatic events over and over again. We were just people who understood the cost of standing up for what we believed was right. My therapist suggested that I start keeping a journal, not necessarily to keep track of everything that had happened in the past, but to help me reshape and reframe the pieces of my experience. The goal wasn't to make the events prettier or more palatable, but simply to see them more clearly and understand them better. Some of those journal entries eventually turned into letters that I never intended to send to anyone. Others became short essays about family dynamics and the cost of speaking truth in difficult situations. A few entries I just tore up immediately after writing them, finding that the act of putting the words on paper was therapeutic enough on its own. My sister Maya and I talk now, though it's on and off and inconsistent. Our relationship isn't the close bond we had before all of this happened, but it's not fake or forced either. We're both trying to figure out how to navigate this new dynamic between us. During one of our walks together, Maya told me something that helped me understand her perspective better. She said that the reason she had avoided me for so long wasn't because she thought I was wrong about Blake's behavior. Instead, it was because my public revelation had forced her to look at things she didn't want to see. Uncomfortable truths about Blake, about our father's tendency to protect the wrong people, and about herself and her own role in enabling problematic family dynamics. On my last night in town, just before the moving truck was scheduled to arrive, my grandmother called me. I picked up the phone expecting some kind of routine small talk or well wishes for my move. Instead, she told me something I never thought I would hear from anyone in my family. "I know we're not a family that says things like this very often," she said carefully, "but I'm proud of you for what you did." She didn't elaborate or explain what specifically she was proud of, but I understood what she meant. I didn't say much in response to her words. I just told her that I would let her know when I arrived safely in my new city. By that point in my journey, I didn't need external validation to feel good about my choices, but those words from my grandmother closed something quietly inside me without forcing it or making it feel artificial. I looked around my empty apartment one last time, checking to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. Then I walked out the front door without any hesitation or regret about the decision to start over somewhere new. This story didn't end with a heartwarming family reunion or a perfectly timed apology from everyone who had wronged me. It didn't provide me with every answer I had been looking for or resolve every relationship that had been damaged. But I had told the truth about what I witnessed. I had stood by that truth even when it was costly and difficult. I had watched the pieces of my family fall apart around me, and I had survived the fallout from my decision. I've decided that surviving with my integrity intact is enough.